welcome to the September meeting of Huntsville Town Council. For those who have been away from the media for the last month and wonder why I'm sitting in the mayor's seat, it's because he's on a leave of absence, running for the federal election. Also tonight, we're without Councillor Armour, who's away on paramedic training, so we're down to a council of 7. Everybody prepared to work harder? Okay, I have a resolution moved by Councillor Fitzgerald and seconded by Councillor Wiebe. Be it resolved that the regular council meeting agenda dated Monday, September 23rd, 2019 be adopted as printed and circulated. All in favor? And that's carried. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interests? Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I have a conflict with Development Service Committee meeting minutes, and it would be item 82.8, bylaw 2019-100, dealing with 1901364 Ontario Inc., and dealing with 450 Muskoka Road North, due to a family member is employed by the applicant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Withey?
Thank you, Your Worship. Do I have to do that much detail?
Just do it right.
I have items 6.2.4, 8.2.5, 8.2.7. 8.2.7 is part of 6.2.4, apparently, as the clerk told me just a few minutes ago. So these are all because these particular applicants happen to be clients of mine.
Thank you. Now I think we're down to a council of 5. Okay. That's it, eh? Okay, so we have an invited guest tonight from Hemsen Consulting for development charges, and I'm just going to, Stefan allows me to introduce him as Stefan K, because I'm not going to try his last name. And we're all ready for you, and you're going to use the screen, I take it?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, great.
Can everyone hear me there? Great. Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor and members of council. The name is Stefan Kshetrunovich, but you know, the polls have trouble with it, so I'm happy to go by Stefan for the purposes of this study. I work at Hemsen. We're a municipal finance and land use planning firm based in Toronto, and we've been retained to assist the town with preparing a development charges background study, which is required prior to passing a development charges bylaw. I'm going to take about 30 minutes to update you on the progress of the study, present you with the development charge rates you could impose under a new bylaw, and discuss some policy decisions you'll be asked to make as we proceed from here on in. I'd first like to take a few minutes to just go over the development charge basics and particularly the legislation under which we operate. And I think this is especially important because I'm sure, as many of you know, the way municipalities fund infrastructure has been rather fundamentally changed with the enactment of Bill 108, the More Homes, More Choice Act by the government earlier in the summer. So I'll talk a little bit about what those changes are and what the implications are in Huntsville. And we can skip then to the development charge rates that we've calculated and the key assumptions that underpin the rates, principally the forecast of development that's being anticipated and the infrastructure projects that your staff consider necessary in order to meet the needs of that development, that new development. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we'll talk about the current bylaw and the current policies in the bylaw and how you want to deal with those moving forward in the next bylaw. And we'll talk about timing and next steps as well. But firstly, what are we talking about when we talk about development charges? Well, they're fees. They're fees imposed on development to pay for growth-related capital costs. So the operative words are really that it's capital costs only, not operating costs, and capital only to the extent that it is related to expanding services or constructing new infrastructure that's going to benefit new development. The principle behind the charges is that growth should pay for itself, and so that the burden of building new infrastructure is not carried by your existing residents. Development charges are imposed by bylaw, and the maximum life of a development charges bylaw is 5 years after the day it comes into force. The town's bylaw was passed in late in 2015. It expires early in 2021. The reason why we are not waiting until 2021 to do this study is to try and align the bylaw with bylaws that exist elsewhere in the district, including the district bylaw. Gravenhurst, Georgian Bay, Bracebridge, and indeed the district itself are currently undertaking similar studies, and the idea here was to try and bring those into line with what's going on elsewhere in Muskoka. The other thing to mention about your existing bylaw is that when it was put into place, the rates that you could have imposed at the time were not implemented. So I'll speak in a little bit more detail about how you went about imposing the rates you currently have in force, but suffice to say they were not the full rates you could have put into place at the time. Prior to passing a bylaw, the town must undertake a background study. That's where we come in, and hold at least one public meeting. And after the bylaw is passed, there's a 40-day period where anyone can appeal the provisions of the bylaw, including the rates, and those appeals are adjudicated at the local planning appeal tribunal, which many of you may still refer to as the OMB. The development charges themselves are levied on a service basis. So when you look at the bylaw and you look at the rate schedule, you'll see there's a different charge for each service. And the town has some flexibility in defining what the services are going to be for which it imposes a charge. These are the services that are in the current bylaw, and you'll see there's two types. There's what are generally referred to as the general services, and under the legislation, you can use development charges to pay for 90% of growth-related capital costs for these services. So that's studies related to development, your library services, your indoor and outdoor recreation, and parking. And then there are two services for which, under the Development Charges Act, you can impose charges to pay for all of growth-related capital costs. And in Huntsville's case, these are the fire protection and roads and related works. I mentioned earlier that the legislative framework under which we're operating has changed recently. For about 20 years now, development charges were regulated by the Development Charges Act and its associated regulation. And on June the 6th this year, the More Homes, More Choice Act received royal assent. The two important things, I think, to remember about this is that the key provisions of this piece of legislation have not yet come into force and won't come into force until some date in the future, we don't know when, which is going to be named by proclamation. Right now, the consensus is that that date will be the 1st of January 2020. But because that date has been only released in draft right now, we really don't know. A bit later over the summer, the province also released regulations in draft, and it's undergone a couple of months of consultations with municipalities, and the expectation is that those consultations will continue at least through the month of October. The single most important change, at least from a municipal finance perspective, of the new legislation is that the general services, sometimes referred to as the soft services, the ones in blue you saw a couple of slides earlier, will be removed from the development charges framework. So you'll no longer be able to impose development charges for libraries, indoor and outdoor recreation, parking, and so forth. They will be taken out of development charges, and there'll be a new charging authority given to municipalities under the Planning Act called the Community Benefits Charge. This charge will also be imposed by bylaw. You'll also be required to do a study. It's called a strategy. And in that strategy, you'll have to list the growth-related projects that you intend to fund through this charge. Unlike the development charge scheme, there'll be no prescribed public consultation, and there's no right of appeal to LPAT for these charges. The other big difference is that these particular charges will be based on the value of a development site. The province has said that it will. I'm happy to take questions if you like, or wait to the end. I defer to you. Okay.
Which would you prefer?
I'm easy. I'm fine.
Councillor Withey, go ahead.
Thank you, I appreciate that, because you're on early in your slides, and I would forget this question. So this group of charges that are taken out of development charges, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, if I understand, is that where do they get levied on then? Are they just part of the general levy, or they're going to developments as well, just under a different name?
Yes, so the development charges for the soft services, these services in blue, will be taken out of the authority of the Development Charge Act and be introduced into a new charge authority under the Planning Act.
Thank you, so it's just a different name. It's just taking it out and putting it under a different heading.
Through you, Madam Deputy, I would say it's not just a change in name. There are some key differences in how the charge is going to apply. And I'll go through those in a little more detail.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. And I apologize because I was going to wait, but we're on it. So in this, under the CBCs, we currently have the Parks and Lieu in the Planning Act. So the community benefits charge will replace that?
Yes, through you, Madam Deputy. So one of the changes, one of the very important changes, is that this new community benefits charge is a bit more of an umbrella charge. In addition to replacing the soft service DCs, it will also replace any contributions you get through the current Section 37 of the Planning Act, which I don't think you really get into. But very importantly, from Huntsville's perspective, it will also replace all dedication of parkland that you receive, including cash in lieu of parkland.
Okay.
Yeah.
One follow-up, thank you. Would this be if you had a new type where I know affordable housing has been in, out, all of those things, and I'm wondering, is the community benefits charge or cost, could that also include an affordable housing line? If it's including the parkland aspect, which is 5% or whatever it is it possible to, and also density bonusing has included housing before. So I'm just curious if that's also a potential item.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Deputy, the details of how this charge is going to be structured remain a little bit nebulous right now. All we know about them is that what somebody pays in a CBC is going to be based on some percentage of the value of their development site. We don't know what the percentage is going to be. We don't know if municipalities are going to be able to have different percentages for different types of development. We don't know if they're going to be able to have different percentages for different locations of development, and we don't know what kinds of rules municipalities will be able to come up with to exempt or provide discounts for the kinds of things like affordable housing that you've just described. We just don't know yet.
All right, go ahead. Last one, and then we're gonna...
Thanks. We don't know, do you have an idea when we might? Is there,
So if you will allow me, we're
Okay.
getting to that.
Thank
In fact, we're at it. There are transition provisions in the new legislation. The authority to impose the new charge will come into force, as I say, on the 1st of January 2020. That's the expectation. And the authority to charge development charges for soft services will then lapse on the 1st of January 2021. So there's a year in which to make the transition from one to the other. And up until the end of this year, municipalities can continue to pass new development charge bylaws for both hard services and soft services. So what we are proposing, in keeping with the study schedule that we have been following throughout, is to bring forward a bylaw to you by the end of this year. The bylaw will be structured slightly differently in that it'll have two schedules, one for the soft services, one for the hards. And so at some point next year, when you make the transition, we can just pull one of the schedules out of the bylaw, and it's a fairly clean exercise. I guess to answer the councillor's question about when are we going to know more, the key holdup right now is what are the percentages that are going to apply to the development sites. And the province right now is wrestling with how best to do that. It's struck a technical committee to study the matter and do some analysis. We sit on that committee, and all I can tell you is that it's really not a difficult, it's a very difficult exercise that they're trying to get their heads around. One of the reasons is because they have committed to making sure that municipalities can collect the same amount of revenue under the new scheme as they did under the old. It's very difficult to ensure that that's going to happen in every place in Ontario. The other thing they've committed to is that they will consider applying a range of percentages across the province, but we don't know, as I say, whether that means that every municipality gets their own percentage or whether municipalities are going to group together. We know, again, that that's going to be very, very tricky because land values vary enormously, as I'm sure you're aware, across the province. So getting the percentage right in every place is a real challenge. I just want to go through what we're required to do then when we undertake a background study. The existing legislation is quite prescriptive about the steps we have to take. So step one is to do a forecast of how much development we're anticipating, what type of development is going to occur, and where it's going to occur in Huntsville. The second step is to look backwards in time and determine what the level of service the town has been providing for each of the services for which we're calculating a charge. Essentially, you cannot use development charges to increase your level of service beyond what you've been providing over the last 10 years. That sets a limit on what can be charged in the future. The third step then is to identify the infrastructure needs that are going to be required to maintain service levels for the anticipated development. And then we have to cost those infrastructure needs and account for any grant funding or subsidy funding that the town's going to receive for that infrastructure. We have to apply the 10% discount for the soft services. We have to account for any portion of new infrastructure that's going to benefit your existing residents. That can't be funded from development charges. We have to account for any reserve funds that you have collected under previous bylaws that are available to fund these costs. And then to the extent that certain types of infrastructure bring a benefit that extends far into the future, if that benefit extends beyond the period in which we're setting the charge, then we have to deduct as well that so-called post-period benefit as well. And once all those deductions have been made, we're left with the costs that are eligible for development charge funding. And when we calculate the charge, we calculate it so that it can be imposed on residential development as a charge per unit. So it's a higher charge for larger dwellings and then a smaller charge for smaller dwellings. And then it's a flat rate charge on non-residential development, and it's imposed on as a charge per square meter of new gross floor area. So what you see up here is just a summary of the development forecast that we're using. It's anchored on the growth strategy that our firm prepared for the district, and I'm sure you're aware of some of these figures that you see up here. We're using a planning period of 10 years for all of the services, except for the roads, where we're setting the charge to recover costs from 2019 to 2031. So we have two forecasts, a 10-year forecast and a 13-year forecast. And you can see here that on the residential side, we have growth of about 150 dwellings a year, and that includes a seasonal or recreational type dwellings, as well as the dwellings that are occupied by your permanent population. And then growth over the 10 years of around 3,500 people, so that by 2028, we're just exceeding around 31,000 people in the town, and by 2031, we're about 1,000 more, just 32,100. And on the non-residential side, fairly steady employment growth, around 60, 65 jobs a year over the next 10 years, mostly in commercial retail and institutional activities like healthcare, that sort of thing. And then the space associated with that new employment, about 26,000 square meters of new gross floor area over the next 10 years. The forecast, I think it's just in very general terms, when this was done 5 years ago, the forecast on the residential side was a little bit lower. So I think it's fair to say that the growth strategy anticipates that Huntsville is a place that will accommodate a greater share of growth in the district than perhaps we thought 5 years ago. And on the non-residential side, this is a far more modest forecast of employment growth than was anticipated 5 years ago. In terms of the growth-related infrastructure on which the charges are based, you'll know that included in your package this evening there was a 2-page summary of the capital works organized by the various services for which we've calculated a charge. We've spent a lot of time with your staff to determine what works are needed, the timing of the works and the cost of the works and the various funding sources. A lot of the works, though not all of them, are already have been identified in your capital forecast documents. The Development Charges Act states that the works that we include in the background study must be a reflection of council's intentions, understanding that intentions, especially as they are expressed over the next 10 years, they change as councils change and priorities change and so on and so forth. So it's simply an intention to carry out the works. We've made all of the deductions, and some of them are shown in the sheets that have been provided. And the only change we've made to the structure of the charge is to combine the parking and the indoor recreation together, because the parking needs, it's felt that the only parking needs are those that are associated with providing structured parking at the Canada Summit Centre. And then a summary on the screen here of, of the total costs at play. So for the general services, we have a program of around $12 million. So those are simply projects that are either in whole or in part growth related. $15,000 in grants, so the cost to the town is still around $12 million. Less any components that will benefit your existing residents, and we have to remove 10% of the costs for the discount. So the $181,000 you see and the $758,000 you see on the left-hand column, those will have to be funded from some other source, non-development charge source, and that's almost certainly going to be your property tax base. We have $1.3 million in development charge reserve funds on hand to fund the costs, and we have $3.9 million in costs that will benefit people beyond 2028. So although we have $12 million in total cost, only $5.8 million is brought forward into the rate calculation. The roads is a bit of a different beast, not just because it's done on a longer planning horizon, but because it's a much more substantial program. So $14.4 million in road and related works, $1.8 million in grants, so costs to the town of $12.5 million. A substantial portion of these road improvements will benefit existing residents, particularly projects that involve the revitalization of Main Street areas and that sort of thing. We feel that a significant component of that is being done to improve what is already there for people who already live in Huntsville. So those have been deducted from the charge. So ultimately, bringing forward to the rate calculation, $6.5 million of those total costs. This slide shows you the charges that have been calculated. Now, these are, of course, the maximum charges you could impose, and inevitably we will get to a point in this process where you will have to make a decision about whether that's the appropriate charge to put into place or not. So on the residential side, for single and semi-detached dwelling units, $8,300 per unit. At the high end, and then for the small apartments, just under $4,000 a unit. And the vast majority of the charge related to the roads and the indoor recreation and parking components. I've also put on this slide here the 40% in the bottom left-hand corner. That's the amount of the charge that's going to be removed and fall into the community benefits charge umbrella at a later date. So, and then on the non-residential side, a maximum permissible charge of $61 or $62 a square meter, almost all of it related to roads and fire. We don't calculate a charge for the recreation and the library, the principle being that we consider that it's residential development that drives the need for those services. So only 4% of the non-residential development charges would be removed and transferred over to the community benefits framework. This table shows you how the calculated charge compares to what you currently impose and what would be in place if you had imposed the full charges last time. So the current charge is the first column of numbers on the left. Right now it's about $4,000 for a single detached unit. If you'd imposed the full charge in 2015, in today's dollars, it would be around $7,000 a unit. And so the calculated charge of $8,300 a unit represents an increase over the previously calculated charge of $1,200 a unit, but obviously is more than double what you currently have in place. And on the non-residential side, it's a very different story altogether. So you can see that the current charge is around $11 a square meter. You could have imposed a charge that would have you at around $20 a square meter, and the calculated charge is $62 a square meter. So it's a substantial increase over what you currently have in place, almost entirely related to a big change in the roads capital program. This slide compares what we've just seen to the charges that are in place in similar and surrounding jurisdictions, both in Muskoka and to the north and to the south, following sort of 400 down into South Simcoe County. This actually shows the charge that a developer pays when they come to pay their DC at the counter here. So they pay two charges, in fact. They pay a charge to the district for the services the district provides, and that's what's in blue, upper tier charges, and then what's in green is what is charged by the lower tiers. So the current charge in Huntsville, you can see, is the blue arrow at the bottom, and I think it's fair to say, certainly in the lower end of the range of municipalities that impose a charge, recognizing that there are some municipalities to the north that elect not to impose DCs at all. And then the calculated charge is the blue arrow at the top, not too different, at least from, relatively speaking, from what could have been imposed in 2015, and still within the mid-range of the charges that are in place elsewhere. And on the non-residential side, you can see that the current charge in Huntsville is quite low, relatively low, but the calculated charge would push you up well within the mid-range of some of the other charges elsewhere. But again, nowhere near some of the charges that we would see in Quarther Lakes and the fast-growing places of southern Simcoe County. So just to conclude then, by discussing some of the policies that are in your bylaw, the Development Charges Act exempts from the payment of DCs municipally owned land and land owned by school boards. There are also mandatory exemptions for when somebody enlarges their home or creates an additional dwelling in their home. And for industrial development as well, there's also a mandatory exemption for the expansion of an existing industrial building as long as it's 50% or less than what is already there. And then over and above the statutory exemptions, the town also exempts from payment of development charges all development that occurs in community improvement plan, in the community improvement plan area. Accessory apartments in new dwellings under certain conditions. And then it also exempts the fire development charge when somebody chooses to put a sprinkler system in and they're not required to under the building code. And then the other, of course, key feature of your bylaw is that when it was passed in I guess it would have been 2016, the council of the day elected to only impose 40% of the maximum permissible charge, and then over subsequent years it increased that percentage until earlier in 2019 when it reached 52.5%. The other interesting thing was that all of the funds that were collected were directed to the Indoor Recreation Reserve Fund. The only project in the Indoor Recreation Service is the repayment of debt on the Canada Summit Centre. So those are fixed commitments that have to be paid, and I think that was the rationale, was to dedicate to the extent possible monies collected in this way to repay that debt to the extent that it's growth related. The important thing I guess I want to mention about this this scheme was that provided that the projects continued to be constructed, you're prevented under the legislation from shifting the burden of this discount onto other development through other fees or charges. So you must fund these kinds of exemption programs through the property tax base, okay? Or not do the infrastructure. That's really your options. The other thing about the bylaw is that there is a fairly, and I'm not going to get into details because the eligibility criteria are quite complex, but there is a rebate, a development charge rebate provided for affordable housing. At least 2 dwellings in the development must be constructed for permanent occupants, and at least one of the dwellings must be rented and must meet some fairly prescriptive visibility requirements. There are current value assessment thresholds and size thresholds that must be met, and there's a cap on how much of the rebate is paid out. We've had some discussion with staff about this particular rebate, and my advice to staff was that there was a movement for some time to use development charges to provide financial incentives for affordable housing. And municipalities are moving away from that for 2 reasons. First of all, the development charge bylaw is a fairly static thing. Once it's put into place and once the definitions are set, there's really no discretion given to councils as to how it applies. And so what that means is that often you get developments that get the rebate that councils feel they wish they had some input on. And there are often developments that don't get the rebate that councils think perhaps are deserving of it. But there's no opportunity for councils to get involved and make decisions on an ad hoc or case-by-case basis. And that's proved a serious problem. The other thing, of course, is that you have no control. You have got a cap here, but there's no control to control, again, on a case-by-case basis, what the financial outlay is going to be. And the final thing is that there are some very good tools now under the Planning Act that give you the sort of flexibility that this mechanism doesn't give you to provide these sorts of incentives. And those are mainly the community improvement planning provisions of the Planning Act. And it was staff that informed me that you are considering updating your community improvement plans. And so my recommendation to council tonight would be to consider whether that's a more appropriate structure to impose these sorts of, or to allow these sorts of incentives to take place. That's certainly not something that we need to make a decision on this evening. And then finally, to the extent that you already provide exemptions for accessory apartments, the new legislation is now actually going to provide us a flat exemption to all secondary suites, both in existing and new homes. So that exemption you already provide may become a little redundant because the new legislation is going to cover it. The other thing the new legislation is going to do is make it somewhat easier for non-residential development and non-profit and rental housing to pay their development charges. So what is payable will be frozen at the time that this kind of development applies for a site plan or rezoning. And it will be frozen for a maximum of 2 years from when they get their approval. So that will, of course, lower the burden from their perspective. And then the other thing that is going to change is that these types of developments, rather than paying in a lump sum, will have a fixed mandatory payment plan. So for all of this type of development, the payments will be made in 6 annual installments, and for nonprofit housing, the installments will be paid over a 21-year period. Other policy considerations that we've had discussions with staff about is the consideration of area rating charges. These are often used for water and sewer services, where you can easily delineate the benefit of a pipe, for example, or a piece of infrastructure. Given the kinds of services we're dealing with, we do not recommend area rating the development charges. It's very difficult to determine who's going to benefit from a road improvement. And so we recommend continuing our current practice of having a flat charge that applies across the town. The other consideration that we've been asked to raise with you is to consider special treatment of industrial development. A number of municipalities in the province treat industrial development differently from other non-residential development, recognizing that industrial development often has quite high upfront costs, machinery and equipment, and a development charge incentive can perhaps encourage industrial development to locate in a municipality. The industrial development also is perhaps less tied to the local population which it serves. There are other sort of macroeconomic and logistical things to consider when locating a factory, for example. The one thing I would say about is if you are going to provide a discount or an outright exemption for industrial development, then it should certainly align with your land use planning goals and your economic development goals as well. And then finally, when we come to draft a bylaw, we're going to take some time to make sure that we align the language and the definitions of the Huntsville bylaw with what's going on in the district. Developers appreciate that, and it's certainly something that it's certainly one of the reasons I think why the town wanted to do this in sync with what the district is doing. So right now, our plan is to bring a bylaw to you for your consideration on December the 17th. That would mean that we have to release the development charge background study in mid-October, which is in 2 or 3 weeks. And we would propose to hold the public meeting in late November. And that would leave enough time for people to review the study in advance of the public meeting and for us to make changes or respond to any feedback we receive at that public meeting before the bylaw passage. And what we're really interested in tonight is for you to consider the list of capital works that have been provided to you. If there are any works that you feel should not be on the list, we should certainly consider removing them from the background study. If there are works that perhaps need some level of a discussion, we can still include them in the background study and remove them, impose lower rates to imply they will not, those works will not be constructed when we consider the bylaw in December. So with that, I am happy to answer any further questions, Madam Deputy.
Thank you, Stefan. I suspect there's going to be quite a few questions, so I'll start with Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And Stefan, thank you for the presentation, very thorough. I have a question and a clarification, a few questions actually, but then a clarification as well from you, if you could. With regards to the residential DCs per unit, the non-residential, the residential would apply to obviously new home construction, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But does it also apply to, say, recreational properties like a cottage and that kind of thing?
Yes, so through you, Madam Deputy, so it's all buildings, regardless of the type of occupancy. So even if it's a cottage that's only occupied for a couple of months of the year, it would still trigger the charge.
And the non-residential then, Stefan, would be like industrial, institutional. Is that the definition of that?
Yes, commercial, institutional, industrial.
Okay. In terms of the payment plan for nonprofit for the paying the DCs over 6 years or 21 years, is that legislation? Is that legislated from Queen's Park?
Yes, that's in the Bill 108, the More Homes, More Choices Act. That's built into the act.
So there's no
So that will happen.
there's no choice here as far as our local council is concerned to say, no, we want to shorten that up or whatever. That's legislation.
Correct.
Okay. And special treatment applies to development charges. Could you clarify that for me? The special treatment part on page 23?
To industrial development, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so I
Yes,
think,
yes, exactly, yeah. Mhm.
so through you, Madam Deputy, I think the feeling here was that given the amount of the non-residential charge that's been calculated, it's certainly, it would be a substantial leap from what you currently impose. I think what staff wanted to have me address here today is that if council wanted to find ways to mitigate the impact of a higher non-residential development charge, this would be one option that a lot of other municipalities elect to pursue, which is to say there are certain types of development that are perhaps more sensitive to higher charges, and that it may be the type of development that council is keen to encourage here, and therefore that would be the kind of development that would be suitable for giving a break to, for
So,
lack of a better word.
if I may? Sure. Does this tie in then more in line with what we've seen in the United States, where states, for instance, have the authority to, say, not tax or impose special regulations on any new industry that wants to come in? We haven't had that opportunity here in Ontario, but this does give us a bit of an option in that regard.
Yeah, through you, Madam Deputy. So, I mean, well, as you know, the taxing powers are quite broad in Ontario, but it's really only one tax,
Right.
and the extent to which you can influence or shape tax policy is quite restrictive.
Right.
But on the development charge side, actually, there's quite a lot of flexibility to create rules for how the charge is going to apply. So there's a lot more flexibility on the development charge side than
Right.
there is on the tax
And
side.
one last question I have, could you explain the rationale from in Bill 108 for separating DCs and CBCs, the rationale behind that?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I don't know the exact intent of the provincial government in bringing the new provisions in that way. I suspect that it started with some level of discomfort with the practices of certain municipalities about collecting density bonusing funds for additional height and density in tall buildings. Now, that's not the case here, obviously. But also there was, I think, a lot of lobbying by the development industry that the parkland dedication and cash in lieu of parkland needed reining in. And so that's, I think, where the idea came that this new charge would replace two streams of revenue that weren't working particularly well. And I think that the soft service development charges got sort of drawn into that in order to provide a bit of meat to the new charge. That's how I think it occurred.
Councillor Withy?
Thank you, Madam Deputy. Can I have half an hour too?
No, you can't.
You mentioned earlier in your presentation that our development charges aren't due till March 23rd, 2021. So, and because I recall last time when I was on council, we were watching the other local communities, and there was almost a race to the bottom to see who could get low enough to attract the most growth by comparing to other communities such as Bracebridge and Gravenhurst. And I'm wondering if that's an advantage we don't want to lose out on by being able to see what and I don't know what the due dates are for these other municipalities. And as well, the places that I mentioned were all under the same district envelope or umbrella as well. So, and that process is due to, I don't think, finish as quickly as this process that's being recommended here. It's going to go beyond the end of the year. So I don't know if I'm comfortable with this timeline to have every bylaw passage December 17th. I think that's, I don't think I'm comfortable with that, because I think we'd be the first out of the gate, and we don't have to be. And there's some merit in seeing where other numbers land, not only through neighboring communities, but also through the district piece as well, because we're not sure about that. That's just a comment. So I'm thinking about those dates, this timeline we're looking at. The other thing is you're not recommending like these 2019 draft calculated charges. That isn't the number you're recommending, is it?
No.
We're gonna land somewhere wherever we want.
No, to be clear, Madam Deputy, I want to be clear about this.
Yeah.
These are simply the maximum charges you could impose.
Right, good. Wanted to be clear on that as well to the listening public as well, because those are dramatic increases compared to what we've been doing. And I will let someone else take a turn and maybe come back.
Okay.
Thanks.
This side of the table. Councillor Alcock?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. Deputy Mayor, not Deputy Chair, sorry about that, a bit tired. If I may, I'm going to go back to that community benefits charge. And I think, Stefan, I really appreciated your presentation, actually. You clarified a number of questions I had earlier, so this should be short. You talked about creating 2 schedules, and so when the community benefits charge comes into force, it would be easy to extract one schedule and then plop it in or whatever. I'm not sure I'm saying it correctly. But wouldn't it require, how easy would it actually be? Because if I look at what you said about the community benefits charge, we actually have to have a strategy or list of projects, and that we might want to augment that schedule that's already been approved publicly. And do you see something like that? Or are we sort of then wedded? If we approve this DC charge before the end of the year, then when it comes time to extract that schedule, would we be able to amend it in order to meet whatever we might be able to do with the community benefits charge? I know that's really a weird way of asking, but...
No, and thank you. And through you, Madam Deputy, I think those are all very good questions. I don't see any issue with amending the existing bylaw to remove the schedule for the soft services. So there's a mechanism for doing that under the Development Charges Act. It would require a staff report, and it would also require, I believe, a public meeting to do that. But that's it. In terms of the strategy that's required, I believe that there would be nothing in the development charge background study that we're about to draft that wouldn't be in the strategy. So the strategy is a less prescriptive document, and the background study has a lifespan of a year after it's published. So we can use all of the material that's in the background study to produce the CBC strategy. So I don't see any complications there. Now, that comes with a bit of a caveat in that it may well be that the final regulations impose a whole bunch of other requirements for the strategy, but I don't think that that's going to be the case. And I guess the only other thing about this transition is that if council elects to not pass a bylaw in December and wait until 2020, the legislation will then prevent you from imposing new rates for the soft services. So the reason for bringing it forward in December is that that is the last opportunity to amend your soft service development charges before the 1st of January 2020 when the new CBC authority takes effect. I guess I should mention, just to the councillor's point here, is that it is true that the district have put a hold on making a decision about what charges they're going to impose, and so has Bracebridge. However, Gravenhurst have imposed a new charge, and so have Georgian Bay. So there are others who have sort of taken the leap, and there are others who, as you say, have decided to consider further.
Go ahead, Councillor Withy. Just see if there's
Thank you.
anything else first.
I told you I'd be back. Quick question, and I understand it was with discussion with our staff about the not, let me just get to it here, sorry, consideration of area rating. And I understand your comment about roads, but we do have very demarked areas that have water and sewer and areas that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And areas that don't have water and sewer and could, and areas that don't and can't because of waterways in between things, or, I mean, it would be expensive. So that to me would think that it might be a good place to have different area ratings. Is that, I don't know what.
So through you, Madam Deputy, I mean, that's certainly something to consider. It's something to consider at the level of the district, however, not for the town's purposes.
So, of
And-
course,
and
obviously.
certainly in areas where water and sewer is not provided at all, the district doesn't impose a charge for those services.
Yeah, sorry, thank you.
Are there any other? Councillor Weep, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. One of the comments you made, or it's in the slide, says that you believe growth should pay for growth. And I'm wondering what your comment would be in relation to the municipalities north of here, it seems, that don't charge DCs. What is it? Are they missing something, or are they doing something differently? That how is it that they're managing?
Well, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I think it's simply that they don't have much development. These are not fast-growing places, Perry Sound and Seguin.
Right.
You'll note if you go a bit further north, even further north to North Bay, they have development charges, but they're a larger, perhaps a little more complex urban area. So once you get into more rural, slower growing places, I think the feeling is that it's just not that important a revenue stream, and we're not building that much in order to justify going through the process. I think that's the bottom line.
Thanks.
I've got one quick question as well. With Bill 108 implementing the authority to have the payment plans, the 21-year and the 6 months, for residential housing, do we have the option to set up payment plans?
Yes, Madam Deputy. So there's a mechanism under the existing Development Charges Act to alter the timing of payment of a DC. So you can strike an agreement with an individual developer, if you wish, to have them pay either in installments or at a different period of time during the development process.
And one other, with our capital list, which we haven't looked at yet, how interchangeable are the items on it? So if we were to approve this list tonight and wanted to just swap out one bridge for another, are our hands tied once we adopt this, or?
Madam Deputy, that's a very good question. And my belief is that the legislation, because it focuses on services, gives a measure of flexibility to councils to swap out projects. So, and this happens very, very frequently. As I say, councils change, priorities change, the rate of development changes, and councils need the flexibility to change their capital programs to respond to these sorts of things. The Development Charges Act recognizes that, and it allows funds to be spent in a way that reflects those changing priorities. So the way municipalities go about doing that varies from place to place. So some will drop projects off and add new projects in at will. Some will say, well, we're only going to exchange one for another, but we're going to keep the service whole, if you like. So there's various ways of doing it, but I believe certainly that the legislation gives you flexibility to do that, for sure.
Are there any other questions? Okay, then I guess we thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
And I know we have a motion to be entertained later on in the meeting, so. Okay, I have a resolution moved by Councillor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Weave. Be it resolved that the council meeting minutes dated August 26, 2019 be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. Questions? All in favor? It's carried. Okay, we're on to reports, and the first one is the Huntsville Library Board. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Yeah, the things are going along swimmingly at the library. We are in the process now of interviews for our new CEO, and the library board, just so you know, has been very hands-on through this whole process, so that staff at the library have not been hung out to dry on any particular situation. They're getting a lot of support from members of the library board. So, yeah, things are going well. And other than that, I haven't much more to say other than things are really going well.
Great. Any questions of Councillor Thompson? Okay. Next is the downtown BIA meeting, and that's me. So a couple things to highlight from the BIA. One, John Cowan was before the BIA to talk about the return of OFSA to the downtown in February 19th to 21st. The snow will be coming back to Main Street. There's some upgrades proposed for the event, and the Chamber and the BIA are also planning to piggyback on that with the Winter Wonderfest weekend. The BIA is also sponsoring, or one of the sponsors, for Wednesday night's movie Painkiller inside the opioid crisis. That's at 6:30 out at Grandview this Wednesday night, if anybody's still interested in going to that. And the BIA has a report and draft MOU going to Protective Services this Wednesday about the skating rink in River Mill Park. And that are the highlights. Questions? Seeing none. Committee of Adjustment, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We had 5 applications with some public meeting content. 1 application was withdrawn and 4 were approved. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions? Thank you. And the Lake of Ace Chamber of Commerce update, Councillor Weeb.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. You stole some of my thunder there, but that's okay. We discussed the OFSA event, of course, that's coming, and it's going to be a big event. If you'll remember, they brought the snow in a number of years ago, and twice they brought the snow in the past. And both times we were unlucky with the weather, I think. It was really cold, and I think not enough kids got a chance to benefit from that. So there's a couple of neat ideas that are coming forward for that event, and one of which is they're teaming up with InfraPipe, so that they're going to have a giant pipe under the snow on Main Street to allow pedestrians to cross back and forth. And that was one of the hiccups last time. So I think that's going to be a neat addition. And it's going to be a lot of fun, I think, for the kids and for the spectators and all the participants that are coming. So anyway, that's certainly going to be a great event. The other thing we talked about, well, we've set out dates for the board's strategic visioning exercises, which are coming up this month of October. So we're looking forward to reimagining and like I said, visioning what the chamber's role is going to be and what the future looks like at the board. So that we're looking forward to as well. Not much else. That's about it.
Okay, any questions of Councillor Weed? Okay, we're going to move right into our committee reports. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Weeb, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Be it resolved that the Operations and Protective Services Committee meeting minutes dated August 28, 2019, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. Councillor Thompson, would you like to highlight anything from that meeting?
Nothing particular. I think we had a couple of great deputations, one being from Don McCormick with regards to the parkours course, or the parkours, I should say, which is would be implemented if approved along the Hunters Bay Trail and that kind of thing. I remember being involved in something like this when I lived in British Columbia, and the city of New Westminster had something like this. It's sort of a neat idea type of thing. So anyway, we'll see where that goes. Other than that, it was a pretty great meeting and great reports, great staff, and as usual, it was just a wonderful day.
I think we have questions. Councillor Alcock.
Just a comment, it's noted that I was present at that meeting and I wasn't, due to family emergency.
Thank you. Clerks will make that change. All in favor of the resolution? That's carried. A resolution moved by Councillor Weeb, seconded by Councillor Withy. Be it resolved that the Community Services Committee meeting minutes dated August 29, 2019, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. Councillor Weeb.
Thank you. Not too much happened at that meeting. We did have Mr. Tony Evans, though, from the Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 232, come to the meeting and request waiving of the fees, the seat application fees for the Remembrance Day Parade. As you know, everyone knows that we always waive the fees, but I think this was more to formalize that we would waive the fees indefinitely because obviously it's a really important event, and it prevents them from having to show up every year and asking for us to waive I think it's about $28 or something like that. I don't remember. So that was kind of a no-brainer. Anyway, we had a report about accepting a small grant from the Older Adult Center Association of Ontario. And that's about it. A couple of updates from our staff, but that's about it. Thanks.
Questions? All in favor? It's carried. A resolution moved by Councillor Withy and seconded by Councillor Weeb. Be it resolved that the Corporate Services Committee meeting minutes dated August 29, 2019, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. And that's my committee. And there was one item that I wanted to update from the Corporate Services Committee meeting, and that was that the committee decided to amend the procurement policy bylaw to establish that no less than 30% weight shall be given to price on an RFP, and no other criteria shall be given a value greater than that of the price. So that was, we thought, a very significant policy update. And are there any questions? All in favor? And that's carried. Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Weeb. Be it resolved that the Development Services Committee meeting minutes dated September 11th, 2019, Session 1, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. And we have pecuniary interest from Councillor Thompson and Councillor Withy. Councillor Alcock, would you like to highlight anything?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Terziano. We had a lengthy Development Services Committee meeting, and so we only actually got through half of our agenda and had to hold another special Development Services Committee, which is on the agenda tonight. But at this one, we dealt with 6 zoning amendments. One was for public information only, and one was deferred for a month to ask the applicant to consult further with residents in the community, and the others were approved. We had one site plan approval and one road stop-up and road closure. 2 of the meetings, 2 of the applications in the public meeting were quite contentious, full gallery on both items, and that's why the meeting was as long as it was. That's it.
Questions? All in favor? That's carried. Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald and seconded by Councillor Weed, be it resolved that the Development Services Committee meeting minutes dated September 19th, 2019, Session 2, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated with the exception of recommendation number Development 15219, the exotic pets bylaw, to be pulled and voted on separately. Councillor Alcock.
Thank you. I won't report on all of the items, but we did approve our response to the proposed provincial policy statement review, which is being undertaken by the province. And in fact, it was kind of interesting because it was the first time that all of the 6 municipalities worked jointly with the District of Muskoka to prepare the comments on this review. And so it was really well done. And so really good presentation, and so we approved that. The other one I wanted to note, which was an excellent report that was prepared by staff on the proposed regulation of short-term rental accommodations. So this is the municipality taking the next step, going out to the public on our proposal to go forward with providing a permit process regarding short-term rental accommodations. So that was a pretty exciting moment for, I think, committee, and those are the 2 things I wanted to highlight from that.
Questions? All in favor? Okay, so this is the motion on the exotic pet bylaw, moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Withey. Be it resolved that Council approve the draft exotic pet bylaw dated August 15th, 2019, and attached as Appendix I to Report Development 2019-221, and further, the bylaw be forwarded to Council for approval. So I'm not going to vote on this one, right? And then I have a motion moved by Councillor Fitzgerald and seconded by Councillor Weed. Be it resolved that Report Development 2019-221 Exotic Pet Bylaw be referred back to the October 16th, 2019 Development Services Committee for further discussion. And Councillor Alcott, did you want to speak to that?
Thank you. Again, so very quickly, I supported absolutely the revised exotic pet bylaw at committee, and a lot of good work went into the updated bylaw. And so this is not me pulling it or asking council to pull it because there are what we saw as flaws in the bylaw. I think it's an excellent piece of work. Having said that, I did have a discussion today with someone from our community who knows of an individual who works with a lot of municipalities on exactly this kind of bylaw. And this person reviewed our updated bylaw, the one that's before you tonight, and offered to assist us in tweaking some of the language that we have in our bylaw to have it reflect a number of more current bylaws that are being implemented throughout the province. There were a couple of areas as well that he had some suggestions we might want to review and update our bylaws, certainly when it comes to language around traveling educational road shows. And the person is not suggesting that we ban these. It's just a case of again, updating and perhaps tweaking the language around that policy. So I would really like us to send this back. We waited a long time for this bylaw. It's a very important one, and I think when we adopt it, we should know that it meets all of the needs that we want it to do. So that's why I'm asking to pull it and to send it back to Development Services.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So through to Councillor Alcock, if I might. So with regards to this, you've been in discussion with the other municipalities in Muskoka with regards to this. The original bylaw that was come forward. Is that not what you said earlier? I'm sorry.
It isn't. I haven't, if I may respond to that, I had a call today with respect to this bylaw that was before us tonight. Mm-hmm. And the person that I spoke to has a colleague who works on municipal bylaws dealing with exotic pets. Right. And much the same as ours tonight, right? And I haven't talked to any other municipalities. I literally got the call several hours before council. Okay. So I would just like to spend another month doing the follow-up with this individual who has offered to provide some advice and to look at our bylaw to ensure that we are in fact covering all of the things that we want to do. It was in no way, the comments I heard were, we are definitely on the right track, this is good, it could be perhaps tweaked to make it a bit better.
Okay. I have no problem with that. Thank you.
Councillor Schumacher.
I got a call this afternoon at lunch with regards to this particular, and the gentleman is working with Kearney and further north to sort of look at their bylaw with regards to, I think there's a bear sanctuary and some different things going in. So he's got some recommendations, just things around, you might want to get a little specific, like hedgehogs. There is only one domesticated kind in the African pygmy, I believe it is. Anyway, he got into, and like your 2 meter within your snakes and serpentines, and discussion around legality and what is health and safety when it comes to these traveling, what are they, mobile zoos, that kind of thing, right? So.
Councillor Worthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I know when I was on council before, we had an issue with our exotic pet bylaw where there was somebody came for an exemption for a snake that was over 2 meters, and we granted it. But one of the things that and I'm not sure what your colleague or whoever, whatever you term them, when you relook at this, one of the things that jumped out at me at looking this current thing is where it says entry and inspection. A bylaw enforcement officer or their designate may at any time enter onto a property to determine whether this bylaw is being complied with. That to me, I mean, don't you need a warrant to search something? You can't, as a bylaw officer, you can just sort of walk into somebody's house to measure their boa constrictor? I would think there might be some issues with that.
Okay, I think though the motion is just about referring it
know,
back as opposed to a discussion.
just
so
making that point.
I think I'll call that question. All in favor of referral? Thanks, that's carried. Okay. All right, I have a motion moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Councillor Weed. Now we get to the fun part of the meeting. Be it resolved that council priorities as set out in Schedule A of Staff Report CAO 2019-19 be included in the 2019-23 strategic plan. and further that these priorities be utilized by staff in the development of annual operating and capital budgets and other corporate planning documents, and further that the status of the priorities outlined in the 2019-2023 strategic plan be communicated to Council at a minimum on an annual basis, and further that the 2019 and 2023 strategic plan as presented by staff at the Council meeting held on September 23rd, 2019 be approved. And now our CAO and her team are going to take over.
Thank you, Madam
Shall I move
Deputy
now?
Mayor. No, you're okay for a few minutes.
Okay.
So we are very excited. I'll invite the team down if you can get yourself organized for the presentation. We are very excited to be able to present to you the 2019 to 2023 strategic plan. First and foremost, I'd like to recognize the strategic plan team who has worked diligently with myself on the development on this plan. We have Joel Duffield, going by last name and order, no preference. Joel Duffield, who's our network and server administrator. Lauren McDermott, who's our manager of marketing. Margaret Stead, who's our corporate information coordinator. And Andrew Zania, who's our records management coordinator. So I feel it's important to note that this team that's worked with me on this plan has done this outside of their normal duties. So I really want to express my sincere appreciation to all of you because I know it was a lot of extra work, but I can assure you that I feel confident this council is going to be very impressed with what they see. So when we first started working on the plan, I think it's important to note that we had conversations about what should it look like, and certainly my vision was we needed something that was easy to understand, something that was clear to the public, something that gave some updates and stats to the community so they could see what our focus was on. And certainly not least, but it had to look pretty. So I had mentioned that to the team, and we had gone through the process, as you're aware, of collecting the information. We had lots of interactive sessions on the main street with the public, surveys. Council had the session in September where we sort of solidified what would be put in the plan. And all I have to say is it absolutely is beyond the expectations that I had. I was envisioning, a PDF document that looked pretty, was clear to the public, and what this team brought back to me was absolutely beyond innovation. So I hope you are as excited as I am when I saw this. It's actually very timely that we're coming tonight because Joel and Margaret and I had the pleasure of attending day one of the MIC conference, which is called the Municipal Innovators Community, and it's something that's been hosted by the District of Muskoka this year. Oh, and actually, we had Councillor Schumacher and Deputy Mayor Terziano was there last night just to provide a few words of welcome. So it is quite timely that they're here. We actually heard Jeff Lehman, the Mayor of Barrie, Jeff Fielding, who's the Chief of Staff from Toronto, and Michael Dubin, who's the CAO of Muskoka, who spoke to the risk and innovation from a leadership perspective. So it was really great. We had a political input as well as administrative input. And they really focus on the needs for municipalities to encourage innovation and to celebrate those ideas. And I think tonight that this is a celebration. It's a new approach that the town of Huntsville is taking. And I certainly won't say any more about the presentation because the team has put together a quick PowerPoint and we'll walk you through the strategic plan online. So it's my belief that tonight that you'll be able to celebrate this innovative approach that part of our team, our staff has taken to roll out our new strategic plan. So I will leave it at that and they will do a presentation.
Awesome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So basically the approach that we took was that although the PDFs are very pretty, when you actually dive into them, there's not that much power there in actually being able to use them as a tool. So the approach that we've taken this time is that this is actually a data-driven strategic plan. So it is actually just a website. You can certainly print it if you want to, but there is no document per se, as there a lot of times would be. And so it is able to just kind of be updated on the fly as we need to provide whatever tool we need. So just a little overview of how the strategic plan is working this time around. So there are layers within the strategic plan. So there is a key strategic area, which you would see And then underneath key strategic areas, there are goals. Within goals, there are objectives, and the objectives would be basically the deliverable that council is looking for in that area. And then underneath those would be business plan items. So business plan items will be attached to objectives when they come out later. So that's kind of how the flow of all those goes down the whole way. And so there, this time around in the draft, there is a total of 126 objectives. Those come from public input, again, online and in person, council input, staff input, everything from the mandate letters has been brought in, and the 2019 new initiatives were also added in, which brings us to a total of 126, which you have, I think, before you in Schedule A. So that's kind of all of the items in the plan, where they came from, and a little history of that. So again, this time around, we are doing a data-driven approach. And so basically, when you go onto that website, you're going to be able to see all of our objectives laid out by key strategic area. And then because it's data, we can start to gather some information from this. Now, what you're going to see at the beginning is a very light version of what is theoretically capable later. But basically, these, to give you an idea, and we'll look at the site in a minute, this information at the bottom is actually live coming from the data. So if we were to go in and add another objective, all of that information at the bottom would automatically update the second that it happens. So then again, the real power from this will come later, when we should be able to provide additional tools to both staff, the community, and council to dive into what's really going on with the stuff inside of the strategic plan, and being able to see the linkages between the goals, the objectives, what we're actually delivering, what the plan is to deliver on those, et cetera. And so again, that will come more with business plans and then after that. So with that, we're just going to dive in and show you what it looks like. So again, this is a website. This was built with tools that the town already had at its disposal. And so first of all, we've got a video message from the mayor, which is in place of, last time around, I believe there was a letter. You want to watch it? Yeah. Let me see. Oh, if we've got the sound turned up. Yeah, it should work.
And I'm really excited for you to check out down below this great new strategic plan update. This is all interactive, it's accountable, it's measurable. You can check it out and make sure that your council is keeping up to date and making progress on the strategic plan that you've helped us build. This is a really exciting development. There's no other municipality, I don't think, anywhere in Ontario that's doing it quite as well as the town of Huntsville. So check it out, be involved, and get engaged.
So to go to what Mayor Jason had said, we do actually not know of any other place that is doing this exact approach. There are some who may provide website versions of it, but we are the only one that is proposing to do one that is entirely based off data, not one that was written out and then someone just went and entered all the data in. So this would be a digital native strategic plan, where basically everything can be measured. It's just a question of what we have built the tools to do. So when you're going through there, you can see in this, again, because of the data, this is live. So if council elected to change items in the strategic plan, once that comes to staff, there are a couple tiny changes that are made, and then basically this data is live for the public to see immediately what those are. So this is just a chart that shows the breakdown of the number of objectives by key strategic area. And so you can see that in the current list, roads and infrastructure has 41 objectives, which is by far the largest of all of those key strategic areas. Again, this is not a direct correlation to anything else other than the number of objectives. Obviously, these objectives could be 41 tiny objectives and something else could be much larger. But it certainly gives you an idea of the kind of data we will be able to harvest later as more data becomes available related to budgets, et cetera. We've got an overview of all the areas and then the goals within them. And then we get into the actual meat and potatoes of the data. So, it's bigger for you. This is where the actual data resides. We've got all of the items which are in your Schedule A inside of here. We've got the proportional share of objectives, which is, again, just from that chart above, the total number of objectives in here, and then also the objectives per goal. So if you were to look at, we are at economic development, you can see that inside of economic development, the business development has 54% of all the objectives inside of there. And if we actually wanted to just look at those, we could filter that. We could just click here and see this side. And now what's showing above is only those under business development. And then there's also a filter on the side where we can do the same kind of thing. Now, again, as we get more data, our ability to add filters to this can improve, and we can innovate on it. And so once we start having reports come back on goals that are completed, objectives that are completed, et cetera, the ability for yourselves or members of staff or members of the public to go in and really deep dive into what is being delivered and what the status of all those things are. One of which becomes very transparent, and then the second is that it becomes very easy for staff to do. So in the past, delivering those updates has been rather time consuming, and sometimes the giant spreadsheets would get out of whack and things would say they were done when it was really something above it and had to get fixed. This is basically up to date as fast as the time is allotted to do it. And again, is just a living document where anyone at any point in time can go in and see what the direction that council has given on these and get the feedback on how those are all going at any given point in time. So that is pretty much the site. I believe that it is live now, so you can go check it out. I think it's not necessarily linked to all places, but it is there. It is being worked on actively, so we are taking very much an approach of the Agile methodology, if you've ever heard of that, which is a very fast turnaround cycle. So we are basically iterating on the ideas, looking for feedback, and then changing it up. So I know there's already some changes pending that'll probably happen tomorrow to it. And so, again, that's just kind of a telling of the whole thing, that this can be a much more live thing, that as we need to, we can change it up. In the future, if there is a direction from anywhere on things that we'd like to be able to go in and look at, once that data is there, we can build dashboards, tools, et cetera, for anyone to go in and explore that and see. It's really just a question of what data we're collecting, and now that we have kind of passed the line to collecting it, it's very easy to collect more and more and more of it because those processes are all in place. And the process itself will not be that different from staff, like for staff. So they will report most of this through their business plans, and the rest of this will just be automatic. So they will do the normal reporting that they have been doing, and the transparency will just flow out of that automatically without any extra staff time. So with that, that is it.
Thanks, Joel. I'm going to let the CEO continue because I think there's some more.
Just a few more items I wanted to outline. So that's what it looks like, but I wanted to go back and give you a bit of context to how we got to this point. So the information was collected. You have the list which is attached to the report, and tonight will be the opportunity for council to look at that list and say, we agree with everything on here, or we want to remove some items, because this will be the plan moving forward. What will then happen with the final list is staff will take that list and they will develop their business plans. The business plans will identify the actionable item, the time period in which staff feel it can be addressed, and that you'll notice this is a plan over the next 4 years. So they might say Q1 of 2021 or Q3 of 2022. They'll identify that. They'll also identify where they believe the funding source can come from. So at a point in time, we're going to be able to tie these strategic, actionable items to budgets each year as they come forward. So staff will populate that. What the senior management team will then do is they'll look at the list that was approved by council, and they'll ensure that some department has picked up that strategic item. So wayfinding signs will not be left out. We'll make sure that they're on a business plan that identifies a time period and potentially costs and where that's funded from. So as a senior management team and myself as a CAO, we can look at the directive that was given by council. We can ensure that staff have picked up those directives and track them as they're completed. So each year, at a minimum, I will come back and do a report to council on the status of the commitments that were made by staff and by council to their constituents, that these projects were finished this year. And the good thing about this is that if something happens and we get into 2020 or 2021, and there's a new item that council feels is really important to complete, we can add that with ease into the plan because it is all interactive, driven by the data that has built the strategic plan. So it provides us the opportunity to be accountable. You can be accountable to your constituents. We as staff can be accountable to you, and we can make sure that they're tracked and determine what we can actually get finished in this term of council. There will be some items that probably we can't get to in 4 years, just based on workload or funding. And it's okay if those items stay on the plan for the next term of council to decide if they want to leave it within their strategic plan. So the other key thing you'll notice, and I did note this previously, is we are proposing it goes until the end of 2023. And that allows the new council some time, if need be, to get their feet on the ground, understand the budgets, understand the direction, and we as staff will start working on public engagement early on in 2023, and by mid-year of 2023, we're passing the next term of council's strategic plan. So the most important thing is it's data-driven, and I didn't hear anyone talk about that today at the Innovators Conference. We actually saw a great presentation from the region of Peel, who have lots of staff that get to work on their strategic initiatives, and it certainly wasn't data-driven. They have lots of great information in it, there's no question, but I do believe it might be the first municipality that has approached it from this, and if there's others out there, I'm sure we'll hear from them shortly. So I just want to thank the team, because it really is a key tool for us to help move council initiatives forward and be able to track them and be accountable to council and the community. So unless there's any questions, Madam Deputy Mayor, that's...
And I think we have questions. I'm going to start with Councillor Alcock.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say bravo. I think it's amazing what you've created. And I really like the idea, and Denise, you answered it for me, that it's interactive, and so if there's a pressing priority that comes up next year, we just pop it in. And I like the idea that the percentages will shift, and that will constantly be a moving target. So hopefully, next year, all of a sudden, we'll see environment and sustainability will be higher than 13%. Just a comment, but really great job. Thank you.
Councillor Withy.
Thank you. Don't want to rain on Councillor Alcock's parade, but I have the one concern I have, I mean, it's a great website and everything, I can't argue with it there, is in this whole process where it's interactive and people can put things in and percentages change, is the actual costing of things. So I think that everything that we look at in these things has numbers applied to it. And if all of a sudden there's a flood of people going on the website and putting more weight onto this, and how does that work accounting-wise when we're sitting as councillors going, well, I guess we better take money out of publics, you know what I mean? Like, if it's a free-flowing thing, we have to set a budget once a year. At what point and who, if something spikes up on the website, who all of a sudden says, oh gosh, I better get down to costing that now because it looks like it's gaining some momentum? And how much extra work is that going to cause through this process? That's the piece that I'm struggling with. It's great to have ideas jumping around and everybody putting their hand up and saying, I want this and want that, but at some point, the rubber has to hit the road. And it's where you say, okay, now this is happening, and you know, whoever's responsible, get down to costing that out because it's got to fit in the bigger budget picture.
So thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So we should be a little clear that even though it is a website, it's not an interactive website that the public can add comments to. So what will happen is when council locks down their strategic initiatives, their actionable items, that will be locked down. The only way they can get changed is by resolution of this council. So if you have a number of constituents that are asking for something in Rivermill Park that all of a sudden you feel that's really, really important, this council passes a motion and we as staff go in and update the strategic actionable items. So it's interactive in such a way that data can be collected, but it's not interactive in such a way that members of the community can change that information.
Go ahead.
Please. I guess I misunderstood. I thought the website was accessed by the public.
So it can be. It's more so for collecting data, not to change the objectives and the priority areas that council has set.
But if more people click on wanting something more than others, then that's going to flow through to this table at some point, or some recommendation. Are we just ignoring that? I don't understand.
If I may.
Please do.
So the items are locked down. It's the items that are decided by council. They are the actionable items that will be included in the plan. So there's no clicking to say we want this or we want that. That is the decision. We've already done the community engagement. We've spoken with council. We've spoken with staff. Those are the items that are locked down. And when staff complete their business plans, they will slot those actionable items into a year, a quarter, a budget costing. And each year at budget time, when the budget's presented, the treasurer will say, as per the business plans, these 13 items were supposed to come in 2020, and here's the cost associated with it. So council might get to that time and say, we can't afford to do those 13 initiatives. So we are going to remove items 5, 7, and 10 from the strategic plan list. Staff will then take, but we still want them to be recognized. Staff will take that and move it to the 21 business plan year, which can all be done interactively. And then you might even have some things that you decide after the plan is passed that you want removed. So for example, we have a ward boundary review that's on the mandate letter at corporate services. So the clerk will have to bring a report to, if that remains on the list, the clerk will have to bring a report to council and say, your year to consider ward boundary review is 2020, and it's going to cost you $75,000 for a consultant. Council can either say, yes, we want to proceed, and it is put in the budget, or they can say, we don't want to proceed with that this term of council. So what will happen with that in the business plan is there'll be a section that will be marked off as removed. So we can say this is what was committed to, this was the final decision regarding the actionable item, and this is where we are today. So these things, even though they're all in business plans, still have to come forward at budget time to decide if council feels that they can afford to proceed with that item.
I think maybe there's a little bit of misunderstanding of what interactive website is. I think the public gets to click on and look at information, but they don't get to change information. That's not the interactive we're talking about. Is that right, Joel? Do you want to add something to that?
Through your deputy worship, To go back to what you were talking about, it's interactive in a reporting sense to give public or whoever the tools to dive into the data that's there. It's not interactive in a feedback sense or an engagement sense. So similarly to how you would use something like Google Analytics to explore the people who come to your website and where are they coming from, and I can turn filters on and off and see what do these people do, whatever. It's that sense. It's not, obviously in that case, it's not changing anything about the people who already came, but it's giving you the tools to look into other ways of looking at that same thing. But it's just because they clicked on it, the next person who comes back, it's obviously set for them to look at whatever they want to look at.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think my initial concern was answered by Madam Corey. And my initial concern was much the same as Councillor Withy's, and that was what are the safeguards to prevent this from becoming unwieldy, but it looks like council is the safeguard having the final say in these things. In Joel's presentation, right at the beginning, we saw new initiatives. So can we expect new initiatives to be part of this ongoing on a yearly basis?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So new initiatives will not be terminology that you'll hear from staff moving forward. You'll see in the budget and financial policy that's being presented to corporate services on Thursday that we have recategorized, and I can't think of what the 4 items were, but we've broken it down to mandatory, essential. There were 2 other ones, which maybe the treasurer can help me with after. So we aren't referring to them as status quo budgets or new initiatives any longer. The reason we had new initiatives was because we pulled the information from the 2019 budget, and at that time they were passed as new initiatives. So we will have new terminology moving forward, and that is outlined in our budget and financial policy, which we can speak to on Thursday.
Any other questions? Councillor Weep.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. How do we square the list between the things that are either mandated or came out of our engagement session or that have been simply brought forward by staff? Because I look at the list and I see items that pop up now and again and I wonder, where did that come from? Like create a building stabilization reserve fund policy to ensure clarity for the use of these funds. I have no idea ever discussing that or where that came from, but it's part of our strategic vision. So I guess I'm trying to square what's come from where and how it all made the list.
CAO.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So Margaret is just checking the raw data. So as I just provide a brief update, the information was collected from the mandate letters, which was approved by committee, input from council at the last engagement session that we had. And then there were new initiatives from 2019. My guess is that one might have been a comment from the public, but Margaret will have a quick look at the raw data just to see where that came from. There are some items on that list that you might question, is it an actionable item? Or in that particular case, is clarification required? So what staff will do as we go through the list and slot those items in the business plan, we may need to bring another list back to council, just summarizing, here are a couple things that we might need to provide some recommendation on. So in order to achieve this, we recommend we could do this, this, and this. So there are some items in that plan that will still need some further feedback from staff, for sure. So, and I think Joel might have the answer.
So that one in particular was in the original plan, and so everything from the previous plan, and so everything was brought forward.
Councillor Alcock.
Thank you. I'm glad Councillor Weeb asked that question because I just assumed that everything in the list was approved by council. To your earlier point, CAO Corey, that this is direction that we've provided through various, through the mandate letters, through as you said, the special session that we held, and other avenues. So But I did, when I looked at the list, there were a couple that there wasn't any recognition of where the initiative came from. So I'm assuming that it came from some area where council approved it, right? Yeah, okay.
I think before we adopt this resolution, and we've seen the interactive strategic plan, and that's great, but we do have a rather lengthy list of items that we're approving that we've seen before, but they've all come to us in different batches. There was the ones the public, there was the ones that we did where we had papers on the wall and we stuck things on them. So we've never looked at it all together with all of these initiatives or ever considered how we were going to fund them all. So I'm assuming this is a living document, and even if we approve it with the attached lists, we can change those lists at any time.
You can, with a council motion, yes.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
I'd just like to say that I think it's great that it's all broken down and available in one place for us. You know, I look at our strategic plan on the piece of paper we used to look at. It's on my wall above my desk, and the categories are there, but not of the information. So this is something that we can review on a daily, weekly basis and figure out what's important, what needs to be dealt with from our individual perspectives on a regular basis. So I think it's a very helpful tool. Great work, everybody.
Councillor Withy?
Thank you. Just for clarification, we've got this list here. It's an amalgamation of a bunch of lists. And if we pass this motion tonight, we cannot change this list without a motion to council?
That is correct.
It's okay, we do everything by motion. Okay, if there's no other questions, I will call the question, if you remember the resolution from 45 minutes ago. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Joel, Margaret, Andrew, and Lauren. Great job. And, of course, Denise. Okay, I have a resolution moved by Councillor Withy and seconded by Councillor Wiebe. Be it resolved that staff be directed to submit the responses prepared and attached to Schedule A to Report Corp 2019-64 to the Attorney General of Ontario regarding joint and several liability insurance costs and the liability chill affecting the delivery of everyday public services. Julia, do you want to talk to that, or?
I've presented a lot of information there about why it was required. They're looking currently at the joint and several legislation, and we did submit a report earlier to AMO, so now as our letter, as well as including our opinion from our insurance company as well.
Are there any questions? All in favor? That's carried. Okay. All right, we are at the Lakeland report. I gotta flip my agenda here. Okay. Main resolution, moved by Councillor Wiebe and seconded by Councillor Withy. Be it resolved that staff be authorized to pay the adjusted Lakeland Power bill of $277,563 over a 24-month period at $11,565.13 monthly, and further that the unfunded portion of the total expenses as outlined in the report in the amount of $417,391 be funded through working capital reserve. And I have a motion to amend, moved by Councillor Wiebe and seconded by Councillor Withy. Be it resolved that the amount of $417,391 be replaced with $245,631 in the second paragraph, and the following new paragraph be added, and further that any budget shortfalls for hydro at the Canada Summit Centre be funded through the working capital reserve. We'll vote on this one first. Yeah, we can have questions on the amended motion. Any questions? All in favor of the amendment? All opposed? That's carried. So now I can read. So now I'm going to read the amended motion. Moved by Councillor Wiebe and seconded by Councillor Withey, be it resolved that staff be authorized to pay the adjusted Lakeland Power bill of $277,563 over a 24-month period at $11,565.13 monthly, and further that the unfunded portion of the total expenses as outlined in the report in the amount of $245,631 be funded through working capital reserve, and further that any budget shortfalls for hydro at the Canada Summit Centre be funded through the working capital reserve. Pete and Greg, do you want to add anything? Do you
Is there
want to
any
take
questions?
questions? Okay. Councillor Withey.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I note here that these overage is going to be a monthly charge of $11,500 and no interest be charged on that. Do we pay our bill monthly regularly to Lakeland? Is there a charge to do that?
Is there a charge, a monthly?
An interest charge to pay our bill monthly? I note that this extra amount isn't, but overall, is there any charge for monthly? No? Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor of the motion? That's carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, I have a resolution moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Councillor Wiebe. Be it resolved that council authorizes the use of the internet and telephone voting method for any by-elections held within the 2018-2022 term of council, and further that the bylaw be presented at the next council meeting for approval. You guys going to use the screen? No. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So this report is solely to ask permission to set the voting method for the 2018-2022 term of council for a by-election, should one take place within the remainder of the term. Although Mayor Aitchison is on a leave as he's running for federal election, this does not address any of that. If he wins that election, that report will come in November regarding a vacancy, and at that time, council will be able to decide what you would like to do. As I say, this is only to do with setting the voting method for the term in regards to a by-election only. Many municipalities have a set overall method for regular elections as well as by-elections. We are just moving forward with a by-election.
Okay, questions? Councillor Thompson.
So thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So this does not impact then in any event or in any way on council's choice of replacing our mayor. If should he be successful and be elected, then we still have alternatives to ourselves. If it's just that we choose to go by way of a by-election, then this is the method we would use.
That is correct.
Wow.
You nailed it. Councillor Wiebe.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Our last election was done by electronically, and what was the price? What did that cost us? Do we know in the end?
It was 107, is that correct? It was just over, like it was.
100, yeah.
Yeah, it was like 100,000.
Okay.
It was, I'm just looking at it here. It was 100,000.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Thompson, another? No. Any other questions? Councillor Wiebe?
Sorry, if I can just follow up on that. So that's to say no matter if you've got one seat or 30 seats, it's basically the same price. for electronic voting? Is that fair to say? That no matter, if you choose electronic voting, whether we're electing the entire council or just one seat, it would be about the same price?
Not entirely, no. It is based on the number of electors. So if the position was at large, so if it's the mayor or district seat, it is per elector. So if it was a seat for a ward, then the number would be reduced.
Okay, thanks.
So just to be clear, we are setting an election method should there be one during this term of council. And that method would be internet and telephone voting. Okay? No further questions? All in favor of the motion? That's carried. Okay, we are at bylaws and agreements, and I know we have some.
You can just note this one has been withdrawn because it was the exotic pet. So that's withdrawn.
Okay, so I don't have to read it.
No, you just say it was
So,
withdrawn.
so bylaw 2019-93 has been withdrawn. That's the exotic pet bylaw.
So you only have to read this, but I'm not sure why that need is here. So
I know.
if you want to.
Okay. So I have a resolution moved by Councillor Fitzgerald and seconded by Councillor Schumacher. Be it resolved that bylaw numbers 2019-94, 95, 96, 98, 101, and 102 be reported and read a first, second, and third time and finally passed this 23rd day of September 2019. Questions? All in favor? And that's carried. And moved by Councillor Fitzgerald and seconded by Councillor Schumacher. Be it resolved that bylaw numbers 2019-97 and 99 be reported and read a first, second, and third time and finally passed this 23rd day of September 2019, and Councillor Withey has declared a conflict. Questions? All in favor? And that's carried. And moved by Councillor Fitzgerald and seconded by Councillor Schumacher, be it resolved that bylaw number 2019-100 be reported and read a first, second, and third time and finally passed this 23rd day of September 2019. And Councillor Thompson has declared a conflict of interest. Questions? All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, now we are back to our development charges. Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald and seconded by Councillor Withey. Be it resolved that Council requests that Hemson Consulting Limited proceed to prepare a development charges background study on the basis of the growth-related capital program as presented to Council on September 23rd, 2019. Does Council wish to go through the list of capital projects that were identified in any detail before passing this? No? Questions then? Councillor Weed?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. So are we at a point now where we want to now hire them to continue the work, or have we already paid for it and is it all squared away? Or is this just, are we trying to decide on what phase 2 would look like?
Julia, can you maybe come up and speak to this? Thank you.
So we have engaged Hempson to be the consultant to finish the bylaw and the background study. So we've been working on that. I think what we're looking at right now is just whether there are any projects that have been brought forward here that you feel should be taken out before they proceed with running the study on these numbers.
But we're in the middle of this process right
Yeah.
now.
So sorry.
We wouldn't be entertaining the idea that we're going to quit in the middle of this process.
Sorry, through you.
Yeah, please.
So the only thing that I would just caution, if we are going to switch directions, is, as he mentioned, we do have to have this bylaw in place the way we're proceeding by the end of December. If we decide that we want to change it, it may be a different engagement. We may have to switch directions a little bit because of the change of the legislation December 31st.
Councillor Withy?
Thank you. That would be my concern is as I raised earlier when Stefan was here, is that I'm not sure that we need to rush to do this before other people are and before even district is. So I'm not sure how this, with what you just said, how this motion is affected by that or not.
Julie?
So the motion won't be affected if we continue through this process as is. If we decide that we want to hold off and wait until 2020 to finish off the study and implement the bylaw, then we will have to go back and change the process somewhat because we won't be able to include the soft services in 2020 if we look at our bylaw after 2020 or December 31st, 2019. So we will have to go back and then we'll have to take those soft services right out and present the bylaw without them if we bring it forward after December.
Follow-up?
And
Yeah.
I'm coming to you.
Thank you. So what's the ramification of not passing this bylaw tonight? Then we can pass it next month or whatever, can't we? I mean, I know we're losing a month, but I guess I'll get your answer, but the way this sits now, I don't think I'll support this because I don't think I want that timeline to be forced upon us. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you. I would like similarly to have the opportunity to look over these issues with Stephen and his staff type of thing with regards to some of the items that are mentioned here, and we still have October. This is September. We still have October to do this, right? And be well within the guidelines of the time that has been set. So I would really hope that we could maybe push this off for 1 month because I'd really like to sit down with Steve and go over some of these items as well. So,
Councillor Fitzgerald?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. It was my understanding in the presentation that if we do not meet the certain deadline, we lose the flexibility in the percentages of our soft services. So is that something we want to be concerned about? It sounded to me also like there was some flexibility in the list as long as it was perceived as new replacing new. So we're stuck with that for a year, are we not, Julia? The inability to change the percentages in our.
Sorry, through you. So with Bill 108, yeah, we don't have that ability within that 1 year time frame, from what I understand, to be able to collect for those soft services because we won't have the CBC in place until we do that study as well.
So just to, if you don't mind, just to clarify, in order for us to pass the bylaw on December 17th, which is the last time we can pass it or we will lose the soft services, we have to go back so many days, 60 days or whatever. So if we don't have our background study done by October 11th, we can't meet the 17th, can we?
Can I just clarify one thing? So just with passing that motion tonight, it's just for them to proceed with the background study. I did confirm with Hempstead, and they said that if anything needs to change, it can still change after today. So if council so wishes, they can take projects out later on in the process. He can still continue as is.
So we can basically pass this resolution to stay on track for our timing, but we can change up the capital projects before we get to the bylaw stage. Okay, now I know there are different issues still, but just so we get it all clear. Councillor Alcock.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. I certainly will support this motion tonight because it's simply it's requesting that Hempson Consulting Limited proceed to prepare a development charges background study. So just to your point that you just said, we can make changes after. It's just continuing with the process. And if we want to, for some reason, delay it until next year, we still can. We're keeping us on track if we need to pass it by the end of the year. And if we don't do it, then I think we run the risk of losing that opportunity. So I'm certainly in support of this.
Councillor Thompson first.
Thank you again. So the four words in here, or the few words in here that concern me about this, and maybe if I could get clarification on exactly how this applies, but it's on the basis of the growth-related capital program. Does that mean that what is in the capital program then is carved in stone at this point, or am I reading that incorrectly?
No.
It doesn't mean that.
We can change it,
We can change that?
yes.
But can we change that, say, in the ensuing year, or do we have to do that before we pass this bylaw?
The one question that was asked is that we can swap things out at any time after the bylaws passed and everything, as long as we're sort of talking like for like. We have some flexibility. As far as setting the capital sheet that's attached to this, you can still have some discussion, and it doesn't hold up preparing the background study. So we can have some discussion and make changes before we get to the bylaw stage as well. Okay? Councillor Withey.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. I'm still need some clarification. So does passing this bylaw mean that we're passing the DC bylaw in December? That's one quick question.
Sorry.
Yes?
So this isn't passing a bylaw today?
Or passing this motion, sorry.
It's just to put us on track, so it doesn't commit us to
Doesn't
passing
commit
the
us
bylaw.
to passing the bylaw in December. And if we don't support, if this doesn't pass, it doesn't mean that we still can't shift our things around before the end of the year either. It's not one or the other. So it's kind of, this is what's concerning me about this motion. It's kind of one of those things that there's a little, to Councillor Thompson's point, there's a little tricky language in there that I'm not sure that I guess I wonder why we need this if we can change everything. If it doesn't commit us to a timeline, and it doesn't stop us from making changes to the other part later, I just don't know the need for this. That's my question.
Do you want to add anything there, Julie?
I think it's in principle that's why we had this motion in place, so that in principle that council agrees with continuing on with this study. But I did confirm with them before the meeting that it can be changed. Capital projects can be changed, and the bylaw will not be passed until the bylaw is passed in December. So there'll be more meetings from that.
I just said December. This commits to passing a bylaw in December. Yes.
Sorry, if council so wishes, they can pass the bylaw in December, but this does not commit council to December.
This does not commit council to passing a bylaw in December.
That's correct.
However, just for clarity, if we pass this today and they do the work and we decide not to pass a bylaw in December, is this work null and void for next year? Julie?
So it has to be within the year for the background
Within the
study, so
year,
we can
okay.
use part of it. The only thing that we don't know is how Bill 108 is going to be applied as far as the CBC.
Okay. Councillor Thompson?
I didn't have my hand up, I'm just sort of waving over here. But I think it was the CBC part that is in question, if I'm not mistaken, right? I think you just said that, right, Julia?
Sorry.
If we don't do something by December, I think then it's the CBC, the soft services, as he referred to them in the report, right?
That's
Right, okay.
Councillor Weed?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. So if I could just, I think, clarify why I'm going to support this. And that is because the way I understand it is that we've got a list of projects that we believe should be considered to be completed, right? And the research they're going to do and the work they're going to do is going to be based on that amount of money that's needed to fund those projects. Now, whether we want to switch one out for another and one takes higher priority, that's up to us. But the work that they're going to present to us is going to be based on that amount of money that's needed to fund those projects. So I didn't see anything on that list that didn't look like it needed doing. Everything on the list, in my mind, seemed like it was probably long overdue. So that's why I'm going to support it. And I think that the sooner the work gets done, the sooner we can get into how we wanted to take on the next step. So I'm in favor of it.
Councillor Fitzgerald?
I don't really know who to direct this question to, but is it not a requirement of Bill 108 that the background study be performed? We certainly don't have the ability to do it, so I don't think we have a choice but to go through with the background study, and then we can decide whether we further want to put this in play.
Councillor Whitby?
Sorry, it just sounded like he was looking at me when he was saying that. And I don't think that one negates the other. I think the background study is going to happen anyway, and when the document's done, it lives for a year. And our current bylaw is good till March 23rd, 21. I have a concern that we're rushing some bits of it, and I now have an appreciation for this December bylaw, because I don't want to get out ahead of district setting their DCs and Bracebridge setting their DCs. I think that's a wrong approach to this, because we could find ourselves on the wrong end of where that number lands. So that's my concern about this. I'm not saying stop the work, et cetera, and the work will be good for a while. It's and whether we lose this option to choose what's in that one category or not, I think a lot of it is pretty much probably going to be moot anyway, because it's going to be standard everywhere. So that's my concern, and that's my complete lack of understanding, I'm sure.
Okay. Councillor Fitzgerald?
One more question. I guess my only concern about not moving forward, Bracebridge is expiring at the same time as ours, and the district, who knows when they have to decide whether they're going forward or not, is how much revenue are we potentially giving up if we can't adjust our CBC's percentages? That's a bigger question than we can answer right now. So,
No,
not a
nothing to
clue.
add to that?
I can get it, but not,
Yeah.
No, okay. I think by proceeding with this now, if it makes sense to wrap this process up by the end of the year, we'll be in position to do that, and if we choose not to, we're in a position not to. So I think we're better off to probably pass it than not. Go ahead.
One final comment. I know I said that once. Can we anyway ask staff to prepare a potential breakdown of numbers from the CBC if we don't go forward?
Julie?
Is it manageable?
So to break down, I don't have the numbers of what we've collected over the past few years, but just to give you kind of a breakdown. So right now we're charging about $4,000 per residential unit, and I would say about 3 of that is for the soft services, and 1,000 would be for the hard services. So it'd be pretty much be 3/4.
So the financial impact is greater than I think anyone realizes. So I think it's great to go ahead with the study, the background study, but I think we need some numbers before we can go any further. Do we need to direct staff to do that?
Can you do that in-house, Julia?
Sorry, just through you, so you just need to know how much would be collected?
Yeah.
So even just off the top of my head, I think we're collecting around $600,000 a year in DCs, so that would be, it would be 3/4 of $600,000.
Councillor Weed?
Sorry, just to muddy it a bit, it was my understanding that we still would collect the same amount. It's just we don't have the ability to redirect them and have the flexibility on how we spend them. Isn't that more accurate? Rather than losing out on actually collecting for the soft services?
Yeah. Julia?
So part of the issue is we're in a transition period and we're stuck in the middle of it, and that's why we're bringing this forward. So if we do decide not to go ahead as of December 31st and we want to implement our bylaw, we kind of have two options. We can implement our bylaw in 2020, and then we can just not have any soft services because we won't be able to implement the soft services within 2020. You can't do that until 2021. So during that 2020 year, you won't be able to impose any charges on the soft services. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to call the question now then. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Okay. Moved by Councillor Schumacher and seconded by Councillor Thompson, be it resolved that Council approve the motion to amend something previously adopted, which would amend motion 12-19 as adopted on January 17th, 2019 as follows. The deletion of member Donna Glashan and the addition of member John Gallagher. Just so you know, we're talking about the Accessibility Committee here. And we got to vote on that amendment. All in favor? And moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Councillor Schumacher, be it resolved that Council hereby confirms the appointment of the following citizens as members of the Town of Huntsville Accessibility Advisory Committee for the 2018-2022 term of Council. Lorraine Blodden, John Gallagher, Kay Leslie, Diane Lupton, Laurel Shaw. All in favor? And that's carried. Whoa, we're down to new business. Muskoka Algonquin Healthcare update. The Capital Planning Task Force held its final meeting on September 12th, and at that meeting, the task force accepted the report of the local share working group. And with those findings, the task force completed its evaluation of 5 development options and came to a unanimous recommendation of a new hospital build on current land for the Huntsville site and a new hospital build on new land at South Muskoka. This recommendation will be presented to the board on October 12th, and once they endorse it, or assuming they endorse it, it will be forwarded to the Lynn and the ministry, and that sort of completes that phase of the hospital. So that's just for information.
Excuse me.
Yes, Councillor Withey.
I'd like to comment on that if I could.
Sure.
I'd like to raise the alarm on what this task force has done and taken 25 months and $500,000 to basically come up with a plan that is designed to fail. There is no way ever that our community will be able to afford 2 new hospital builds in Muskoka. So my concern is that that this is basically going to get us eventually back down to having to pick one site or another. There is the local number they're stating is around $140 million for a population of about 60,000 people, perhaps up to 76,000 people in 10 years, and other areas such as Windsor that have been having these kinds of issues imposed on them. They've got population bases of over $200,000 for similar amounts. The 17% they're stating is universally accepted as light. It's generally around 24%. And with continuing costs, that number of $140 million will balloon to $210 million within the period of the time that this is going to take place, because the funding starts as soon as a shovel hits the ground. So the other issue I have now in this current situation is that this is going to the mock board on October 10th, which then will be forwarded to the LIN to approve. And this is stage 1B that's happened over 6 years of a 6-stage process, so there's still 4 more stages to go. And the problem I have now is that the LIN has no board anymore, so there's zero oversight in there, and I think that that's problematic as well. So the only feasible option that the road should have been explored more, in my opinion, is to renovate existing sites on a schedule as needed. As we know, particularly here in Huntsville, we have lots of property. We know that the existing building was, when it was built, was pre-engineered for another story. We know that a lot of the west wing there is empty for offices now that aren't being used for patient care. So I think that, as I said before, that this is a plan that's designed to fail. I think we should all be very alarmed at what's come out of this task force. I think that it's going to be, I mean, there's nowhere in the history of Muskoka where this kind of money ask at this volume has been asked for anything at any time in forever. And it would virtually bankrupt the entire district. So for those who think that this is a great move and we're all going to get 2 shiny new hospitals, you really got to get your head out of the sand on this one, because it is not ever going to happen, because nobody can afford it. And not even so much us, the province isn't going to afford the $600 million price tag to build new hospitals for 60,000 people. It's just not the math that's going on in this province now, and won't in the near future. So I've been an advocate for healthcare for a long time in this town, and I really feel passionate about this, that this move is bad for us in Huntsville, it's bad for Muskoka, it's bad for the catchment area, and it's designed to fail. So I'm very disappointed that it's come to this. I think we've all been, I think it's almost like they're doing this on purpose. And if I can, there was a Windsor, Essex, somebody was saying, when they looked at this, they said it looks like a scare tactic to suggest the 2-site model is too expensive, and I think that that's the truth. So I don't know where this is going to go from here. I think certainly with the current financial situation with the province, it's not going to go anywhere fast. But because these things are getting approved along the way, and there's still other stages to go, there will be a point where we'll be asked to pony up the value of our entire homes to try to build something that's unattainable, and then we will know what really is going to happen to us here in healthcare in Muskoka and area. So that's my little speech. Thank you for listening. You know, I think everybody should be concerned and engaged and speak to their MPP, MP, anybody who listen, us, and we've got to really look at how the mock board is operating with these task force and with no municipal representation and non-elected boards. And that, to me, is the basis for this issue that has brought us to where we are today, which is, I think, a very dangerous place for the future of healthcare in our area.
Thank you for sharing those sentiments. And I probably should have added that I believe the October 10th meeting where it's presented to the mock board will be an open meeting. So there may be an opportunity for anyone who wants to voice some opinions there, I think.
I'm sure they'll go into closed session to vote.
Okay, any other comments on the hospital update? Okay, so the next resolution before us, and just by way of a little bit of background, this was forwarded to us from a group called Safer Highway 11 Muskoka that basically was asking for our council support to push the province to get rid of the exits and entrances onto Highway 11 between Bracebridge and Huntsville. So it's a long resolution, but it's moved by Councillor Schumacher and seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald, whereas Highway 11 is a primary gateway to Ontario's north and runs through many Muskoka communities, and whereas there have been over 950 road accidents along Highway 11 in the last 10 years between Stevenson 1 and Highway 60, and whereas there are several level crossings along this portion of the highway, all within the town of Huntsville and the district of Muskoka, which have contributed to the number of accidents and close calls that many Muskoka families and visitors to our community have experienced, and whereas the Ministry of Transportation has studied the road safety conditions along the route over a decade ago, proposed closing these at-grade intersections and replacing them with safer interchanges in 2 locations and bridges and others, dramatically improving road safety in our community, and conducted public meetings and completed a class environmental assessment on the preferred locations of these new interchanges. Had its plans for this stretch of Highway 11 approved by the Order in Council of the provincial government. And whereas this work by the Ministry of Transportation was completed almost 10 years ago, the Government of Ontario has not taken any other action to date to close and replace these dangerous at-grade intersections. And whereas Safer Highway 11 Muskoka, a grassroots community group, has launched a petition with the support of several hundred residents and cottage associations calling on the new provincial government to finally move forward by funding this infrastructure program and including it in the 2020 budget. Therefore, be it resolved that the town of Huntsville urges the Government of Ontario to move forward with these road safety improvements along Highway 11 by including them in the Ontario 2020 budget and the Ministry of Transportation's 5-year plan for infrastructure improvements, and further that this resolution of council be communicated to the Premier, Minister of Transportation, the MPP for Parry Sound Muskoka, and Safer Highway 11 Muskoka. Questions, comments? Councillor Weed.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. I do have a comment, actually, and I share the sentiments of the group because coming on and off those highways, we all know, can be incredibly dangerous. Now, but within all this that's been put forward, nowhere does it talk about actually considering reducing the speed along that hot stretch of highway between Stevenson, as they know, Stevenson Road 1 and Highway 60. And I'm just wondering if that might be something worth considering, because until dramatic infrastructure changes take place, there's not much else you can do to improve safety other than maybe reducing the speed through there. So I'm wondering if that's worth considering, including in this motion.
Councillor Wizzy?
Yourself, Deputy Mayor, and Councillor Thompson, and I remember when 2 terms ago, when the Ministry of Transportation came and actually outlined all the dangerous places along that stretch of highway. And interestingly enough, when we pressed them on when are you going to get around to making the changes, the answer was, well, we don't have any money. And one of the most dangerous intersection they said at that time was in Port Sydney at Smith's Golf. And interestingly enough, it wasn't crossing traffic, it was because there is no acceleration lane in the northbound lanes. That's where most of the accidents are happening. So when you think it could be like a 50-foot strip of asphalt, to build an acceleration lane would have a dramatic increase, not be as good as new overpasses and things like that. But if you're looking for a cheap relatively cheap way to address one of he called it at the time, the most dangerous intersection in northeastern Ontario is how he termed it. But yet they didn't have enough money to act on it. I got to say, I don't agree with Councillor Weeb with speed being the issue, and that's that age-old thing about, there's lots of data that states that actually it's not about speed. There are these other improvements that really do make the differences in these things. I mean, it'd be great to have an overpass at every one, but who's got the money for that? We got hospitals to build. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Thompson.
I would agree with Councillor Withy on this. I would maybe also suggest that an improvement at that intersection might be a longer egress lane as well, ingress and egress, because I think you're absolutely right. I think what happens, and I remember Councillor Beattie, how many terms ago, talking about the problem there, and it's easy to see it happen, because when you pull out and you want to go northbound there, and someone happens to be exiting the highway, you can't see the cars coming in the driving lane, not let alone the passing lane, but the driving lane. So it's just that. I think if that would be a short-term solution to it, but I think it would improve the safety of that intersection by leaps and bounds.
Well, I think this resolution that's circulating to municipalities is probably a good resolution to support, and maybe we want to consider a secondary one about that one particular intersection at some point in the future. All in favor of the resolution? That's carried. Council correspondence. One, oh, no, that's that. Council correspondence. Well, that's just information. District of Muskoka update, right? Or am I supposed to do this now? No, that's down there. Yeah, District of Muskoka update. Who wants to go first? Councillor Alcock.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. I will make this short and sweet. There's only one item that I really would like to raise with the rest of committee because of the importance of this one particular item. And if I may, I'm going to read 3 lines of a motion that was approved unanimously at committee, and that motion is that a bylaw be prepared to modify and approve the modified Town of Huntsville official plan adopted by Town Bylaw 2019-23 in accordance with Schedule A to report CPS. So our committee unanimously supported our revised official plan. So that was a really big moment. There were tons of questions from the councillor from Bracebridge about the boundary changes that we asked for and were approved by the district. And but it was a pretty exciting moment. And so, of course, it's not fully approved yet because it needs to go to district council. But I just thought that that was really important to say and to thank all of the people that have worked on this process for years, including, you know, citizen input. Our own staff have been incredible. And again, the work between our staff and staff from the district, the collaborative approach was really great because they participated, the district participated in our process throughout all of the, you know, at least 3 years, Kirsten. And we also had a citizen advisory committee that worked very hard for a period of time, providing feedback. So a lot of people involved in this, a lot of great comments from the public, either verbally or through written letters, and it was a very exciting moment. So that's all I want to report on.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. A couple of things from Public Works from last week. One had to do with a passing of a recommendation dealing with tactile plates. And this applies to only one location in Huntsville, and that, of course, is at Main and Center Streets. The award that was approved was for about $500,000, of which the district pays about $100,000. Most of the cost of this is in the cement work that has to be done, and so that's the municipal portion. So that would include the signals as well as the tactile plates as well that go into the pavement type of thing. And the other thing that was a little bit controversial was the awarding of a contract and budget amendment for the consulting, engineering, and urban design services for the reconstruction and streetscaping of Muskoka Road 3 in the town of Huntsville. And we got pushback on this from the chair, Chair Harding, because he thought that because this is our baby in the town of Huntsville, why is the district putting up $700,000 or whatever it was towards this? So it meant a budget amendment of about $318,000. But anyway, the rest of us did. It was a 6-1 vote, and the chairman voted against it. So that had to do with the streetscape and so on that's coming forward, and this had to do with the district's portion of it. And anyway, so the total budget is in the $754,000 range type of thing. So anyway, yeah.
What? Councillor Withey, do you have anything from health?
Sorry, my 14-year-old's wondering when I'm coming home. Health services, couple of quick things. We are supporting the Muskoka and Area Ontario Health Team, which has an acronym which I can't pronounce, but it's MAOHT, and this is the team that's being. It's sort of born out of the primary care reform thing / sort of masked like it's Dr. David Matthews is spearheading this, so it's something, it's kind of like the new, the future of delivery of primary health care. So we decided to support that. And the other thing is, this one's kind of important because in the next year, the province is starting to download some of the costs of health services to the district, and we're going to make. So the recommendation funds have included 2020 draft health service department tax support operating budget, the 2020 capital budget, and forecast to maintain current service levels due to the elimination of provincial funding. So we're going to be hit with more costs being downloaded next spring, and this is basically saying we're going to maintain current service levels despite that, which I think is kind of important. There was the issue we brought up last time, but I'll leave that to Councillor Weeb because he's doing the overall thing on public health. Thanks.
He is. Councillor Weeb.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Terziano. So at District Council, we had a presentation from the YWCA, and they highlighted some of their programming and some of the relations that they've got established and some of the fundraisers and events that they've put on, which was really great to see. The item that Councillor Withey is referring to was the motion put forward recommending that the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, I can read it for you. Has recently passed a recommendation requesting that the Minister of Health keep the full territory of the SMDHU intact and join with York Region. That was up for plenty of debate during the council meeting around the table. There was obviously more questions than answers, I felt, and I don't know if Tim, you wanted to speak to this, because I know that you had plenty to say during the meeting. So if you want to address that one, you can go for it.
I'll be brief.
Okay.
Essentially, this came up to Health Services Committee originally. It was a request to support us being aligned with Southern Territory and the new breakdown of the LHINs into larger groups, which would have put us in with York Region. Makes no sense to me. We would be, I think, the poor cousin in that group. I served on District Health Council from 98 to 2004 when we were aligned to the north under that system, and I think we got along quite well with our northern neighbors. It helped us with our catchment area north of in East Perry Sound as well for delivery of services. So there seemed to be almost a sentimental desire to stay with Simcoe and create their own little bubble, which wasn't practical as well. So the result of the discussion was there was a lot of, as Councillor Weeb suggested, a lot of more questions perhaps than answers. So the resulting motion was to defer, which I was fine with, because to me that there were a lot of those questions I don't think will ever be answered. So I got the result I wanted anyway, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The other discussion was around, as you can imagine, development charges, which was originally there was a task force struck to pursue this, and they set aside a bunch of money to do a lot more work and work with Hempson, et cetera. And that was defeated and referred more so back to staff to get into the data that they currently have to come up with essentially the appropriate number, much like what we're going to be doing. There's the creation of the Muskoka Employment Partnership, which they highlighted that the District Council would be supporting this task force essentially with a grant over a 2-year period. And there'll also be some staff time and some in-kind services, essentially to help boost the level of employment in the district. That's the long and short of it. So everyone was in agreement there. And other than that, there was a closed session item that I cannot talk about.
Does the district have a timeline for when they hope to come back with their numbers?
For the development charges?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about December, but we don't know.
Okay. All right, thank you. Couple information items. The Culture Days flag raising is September 27th, which is this Friday at noon. If anybody is around and wants to attend that. That's also the same day as the march, isn't it? Yeah, we also have the global climate strike on Friday, the 27th, from 11:30 to 1 at the Huntsville Town Hall, so there might be a little bit of a conflict there. And is there anybody planning on attending the climate change march on Friday between 11:30 and 1? Yeah. Sure.
This is another climate change march?
Yes,
Because
last
we
week
had
was
the,
the
we had,
students.
we had the students last, okay, so this is in addition. Yeah,
Yes.
I might,
So that's this Friday in front of Town Hall, as is the Cultural Day
think
flag
at the
racing.
same time.
And one other announcement I just wanted to highlight. I know that this came out a little while ago, but it was about funding for the Etwell Bridge, and we did finally get our official letter, and we have 50% funding for that bridge from the federal government and 33% from the provincial government, and so that makes our piece a lot lower. So that's really good news for us. I think that's it. And now I have a resolution moved by Councillor Schumacher and seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Oh, hang on, just before I do that, did anybody else have any new business? Seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald, be it resolved that confirmation bylaw 2019-103 be received, numbered, and read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed this 23rd day of September 2019. All in favor? That's carried. Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Schumacher, be it resolved that we do now adjourn at 8:50 p.m. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, Council, for your support tonight. Thank you, staff. Good night.